Ever since the release of the Tales from the Pizzaplex story known as the Storyteller, theorists across the FNaF community have been wondering if William Afton is actually back in the Pizzaplex era of the FNaF timeline. When the story The Mimic came out, that question dialed to 11, with a lot of theorists now thinking that William is not back. I want to start this video by saying that it's 100% undeniable that Glitchtrap and the Mimic endoskeleton are not William Afton, and since Mimic is likely the endoskeleton for Burntrap, it's possible that Burntrap isn't William Afton either. Or is he? You'll understand this video a bit better if you watch my recent video on the Mimic, just so you'll understand why Glitchtrap and the Mimic are not William, and why the Mimic is Glitchtrap. But in this video, I'll be going over all the evidence for each theory regarding William Afton being around in Security Breach. I'll go over some things that the recent Tales from the Pizzaplex Book 7 Tiger Rock either implies or debunks, and what bearing it has on the lore. And in order to understand some of the things I talk about in this video, I encourage you to watch my last video on Under Construction and its possible insight into the Ruin DLC. But without further ado, let's get started. I wanted to start off by talking about Tiger Rock, which was an alright story about a boy named Kai who goes into today's exclusive VR experience, which was viewing what the Pizzaplex could potentially look like in 10 years. He and his friends had wanted to see this storyteller's tree, but for whatever reason it was closed and was going to be taken down. When he goes to the VR booth, Future Freddy gives him a tour of the futuristic Pizzaplex and introduces him to a tiger animatronic named Tiger Rock, who at first seems cool, but they end up hanging out together after Freddy leaves, and Tiger Rock, seemingly unintentionally, keeps hurting his arm. Kai ends up running away because it hurts too much, but Tiger Rock finds him and grabs his arms, but then when Kai got out of the VR booth, he found that his arms still hurt from it. For the next little while, he begins seeing metal objects with metal fur and one green eye and one blue eye, just like Tiger Rock, which end up resulting in numerous situations where he almost loses his arm, or at the very least badly hurts it. He eventually figures out that he's still stuck in the VR booth, and ends up in a messy conglomeration of random colors with vague shapes around it, eventually seeing a little girl with a messed up looking doll and her grandfather, and eventually breaks out of here and finds himself outside the VR booth. He was apparently trapped for 5 hours, but he doesn't tell his family about it and acts as if nothing was wrong. That night, he heard a sound, but when he went to investigate, Tiger Rock showed up and ripped off his arms, ending the story right there. Now, there's a couple interesting things about this story. First of all, something I mentioned in my last video was that there's a constant theme of fake or warped realities in the Tales from the Pizzaplex series. Tiger Rock continues this trend, showing Kai in a fake reality as well. What I find interesting about this is that Fazbear Frights, which was not entirely but primarily about providing information about the old storyline, had a constant theme of body swapping and controlling, which was heavily associated with Glitchtrap, who is more prominent in Tales from the Pizzaplex. So if the previous series had a theme connecting to the current series, is it possible that there will be, to many people's dismay, another book series after Tales from the Pizzaplex where the fake and warped reality theme will be more prominent for the storyline after Ruin? Maybe that's what Help Wanted 2 will connect to. Instead of having the Mimic be at play again, what if people get trapped within the game this time? Who knows, but it's something I wanted to bring up. It's probably not what's going to happen, it's just a random thought that I had, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Before we go on and talk about the Monty Within, let's talk about the lore that Bleeding Heart provides. Alright, now let's move on to the Monty Within. In the Monty Within, the main character Kane does an essay on the left brain being a sort of AI within your brain, while your right brain is your consciousness, basically. One day, Kane is at the Pizzaplex with his brother and plays a game called Fazcade Tag Team, where you would be on a team with an AI representation of an animatronic, which would essentially mimic what you do and use its advanced programming to act as it thinks it should using context clues from your gameplay. Kane wanted to know more about the program, so he returned and ended up beating up the arcade trying to lift a panel off of it, and then this resulted in him getting possessed by the AI of the game in the form of Monty, which essentially acted as a voice in his head, giving him intrusive thoughts and making him act in ways that he wouldn't. Eventually, Monty got sick of him and cut his brain in half with a saw at the school woodshop, which is where the story ends. The interesting thing about this story is that it's all about Monty invading Kane as a voice in his head. He's essentially possessing Kane in the same way that Glitchtrap possesses Vanessa. The reason this is so important is because the Mimic in the Storyteller is heavily implied to be Glitchtrap, given that the Mimic program is what makes the animatronics in the Pizzaplex go haywire, plus the fact that the door to Glitchtrap in Princess Quest has a baobab tree on it just like the one that spreads the Mimic virus in the Storyteller. However, in the Monty Within, the AI that controls Monty in the Fazcade Tag Team game, the same AI that possesses Kane, uses the Mimic 1 program given that it mimics what Kane does in the game. What this essentially provides us is even more big evidence that the Mimic and Glitchtrap are one and the same, as the Mimic virus enters someone's mind and controls them the same way that Glitchtrap does. Something else I talked about in my Under Construction video was the fact that Tales from the Pizzaplex and Fazbear Fright stories have parallels to each other within the context of each book. I made a video about this back in January, and I still stand by it. The stories in Lally's game each parallel a story from Into the Pit, and the stories from Haps all parallel stories from Fetch, and so on. In case you haven't watched those videos, I'll briefly explain all those parallels, but very quickly. Into the Pit parallels Under Construction as both are a fake reality. To Be Beautiful parallels Frailty for very obvious reasons. Count the Ways parallels Lally's game through the strange item someone close to the protagonist has had for years, which ends up killing them. Fetch parallels Haps since they're both about an animatronic trying to help but unintentionally killing. Lonely Freddy parallels B7 as both have a human in some way become an animatronic. Out of Stock parallels Help Wanted as Steve goes through nightmares and Plushtrap is a nightmare animatronic. Somnophobia and 1:35 AM are both sleep related. Pressure and The New Kid are both about springlock failures. Clethophobia and Room for One More both take place in a small space with Ballora related characters. Animatronic Apocalypse and Dance With Me both have possession, and Bobby Dots Part 1 and Coming Home both have characters woken up in the middle of the night. Submechanophobia is the only outlier here, but while it doesn't parallel Step Closer, it does parallel The Scoop, which was one of the scrapped Fazbear Fright stories. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I haven't covered this topic in a while, and since I have, 3 new Tales books have come out, and the thread has continued. GGY and In the Flesh both have a hacker who is involved with gaming, and both stories involve characters getting possessed or infected by a glitching rabbit from a game. If you don't know who the hacker I'm referring to from Into the Flesh is, I mean the dude named Gene who hacks the game to play it early. The Storyteller and the Man in Room 1280 both lay the groundwork for William Afton or the William Afton-esque character present in the future and past stories in each respective series. Bobby Dots Part 2 and Bunny Call both have the protagonists face off against the enemies within living quarters while also trying to keep people they care about safe. Nexie and Blackbird both have a terrifying character created partially by the protagonist, which results in someone getting very hurt, and both stories were caused by the main villain in the epilogues, which I'll go over in a bit regarding Nexie. Drowning and Hide and Seek both have a Fazbear game haunting the protagonist before they eventually die inside that game. The Mimic and the Real Jake both show the origin of the endoskeleton character in the epilogues of each series. Tiger Rock and the Breaking Wheel both have the protagonist get mutilated by the antagonist after one of them unintentionally hurt the other badly, and in both cases the ending probably didn't happen, or at least it wasn't real. And when I say that, I mean that the Julius at the end of the Breaking Wheel was probably a manifestation of Reed's fears rather than the real Julius. The Monty Within and He Told Me Everything both involved body snatching, and Bleeding Heart and The Cliffs both have the main antagonists have no ill intentions and are only trying to help. Going back to Tiger Rock though, I want to discuss its connection with Nexie and the connection both of them have to the Mimic and Glitchtrap as well. When I was briefly summarizing Tiger Rock earlier, you may have noticed I mentioned that when Kai was in the void of random colors and vague shapes, he sees a little girl with a messed up looking doll and her grandfather. This is of course Astrid with Nexie and Astrid's grandfather, but why would this be shown here? I don't know exactly why Kai would be seeing this, it's a bit random, but I think the reason behind it in terms of lore is because the stories take place around the same time and are both caused by the Mimic. The day that Nexie is made, the Storyteller's tree had been infecting everything and causing glitches all over the Pizzaplex, partially probably because of the actual Mimic virus itself, but also possibly because of the agony of the deaths of Edwin and Mr. Burroughs, but that's up for interpretation. I feel like that's the most likely option, but obviously it's probably a little bit of both. That's what messed up the appearance, the name, and the personality of Nexie. But then when Kai goes into the VR booth, it seems that the Mimic, when spreading their program throughout the Pizzaplex, had digitally inserted itself in its current form inside the Storyteller into the VR booth, which is why Tiger Rock, which is the Storyteller, appears in the VR booth. And we also know that Tiger Rock is a result of the Mimic because of what it does. Tiger Rock spends the story continuously almost making Kai lose his arms before directly ripping them off at the end and taking them with him. This perfectly matches the Mimic in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, who always takes off the limbs and the heads, and while Tiger Rock doesn't take off the heads or the legs, it does take off the arms, which the Mimic does in the epilogues, and since the Mimic is the Storyteller, and the Mimic, it rips off the arms, and the Storyteller rips off the arms, then I think it's pretty clear that that's supposed to be a connection. I also want to say that in Tiger Rock's epilogue, people have been saying it's implied that the Mimic isn't mimicking Afton at all, which is technically true, but it doesn't mean that he isn't Burntrap. In a theory from a long time ago, before Security Breach came out, a long time before Security Breach came out, I can't even remember which theory it was or how he came to the conclusion, but Matt had suggested that the glitch trap virus was in multiple places at once. I don't think he was exactly right about where it was, but he was basically spot on that it was in multiple places at once. The Mimic program is in 3 different places at once. The control variable in all these different mimics is the replication of David's childishness and Edwin's violence. In the Storyteller, the Mimic is simply that program, and in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, the Mimic is also simply that program, but also within the original Mimic endoskeleton. The one in the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience is the one that's mimicking Afton, and that is the one that ends up, with the help of Vanny, infecting the Mimic endoskeleton. Glitchtrap is always the Mimic, but the Mimic isn't always Glitchtrap. The program is used differently in all these scenarios, and it's used at 3 different stages of the program's evolution. The Glitchtrap virus is simply the one that's the most advanced, and the Mimic in the Pizzaplex is the least advanced, simply being limited to just a program. But it still manages to infect the entire Pizzaplex before Gregory, possessed by Glitchtrap, comes along and infects the animatronics with the more advanced Glitchtrap. I don't know if this sounds really confusing to you guys, but what it boils down to is that the Mimic Endo is under the Pizzaplex, the Mimic Virus is in the Pizzaplex, the evolved Mimic Virus, which is mimicking Afton, is in the VR game and infects Vanessa and Gregory, and then Gregory puts the evolved Mimic into the animatronics, which were already infected with the less evolved Mimic. The less evolved Mimic had already altered the animatronics' behavior, but the Glitchtrap Virus, the more evolved Mimic, amplifies the already altered behavior, eventually turning the animatronics into the ones that we see before us in Security Breach. However, the loose thread in all of this is the body on Burntrap. Who is it? Nexi seems to hint at the concept of a human body being attached to an endoskeleton, but whose corpse is it that ends up on Burntrap? Well, we'll get to that in a bit, but first let's talk a little bit about William Afton and whether or not he's still around. Is he the body on Burntrap? Don't worry, we'll get there. A lot of people say that because the Mimic is the endoskeleton for Burntrap and is the Glitchtrap virus, then William Afton must be dead and gone for good. But that's not really true. In the Fazbear Frights epilogues, it is shown that after the FNaF 6 fire, William Afton is not gone for good, even after Ultimate Custom Night. While I don't believe those epilogues happened in the game's timeline, it still shows that Afton should have survived the FNaF 6 fire. That doesn't mean he's definitely 100% still alive, but it makes it very likely in my eyes. So how would he still be around if he was? The first option is that going into FNaF 6, since he knew it was a trap, somehow he possessed the Mimic as a backup just in case he died. Personally, I don't see this as very likely, as I don't think the Mimic as a character is really necessary if William Afton just possessed it anyway. Afton being Burntrap would still make sense because the Mimic is kind of required for him to have gotten to that point, but simply possessing the Mimic before it even becomes Glitchtrap is just a bit of an unnecessary cop-out. Another option is that Afton is still around but is dormant at the time because he hasn't yet been freed from Ultimate Custom Night. This can work whether the corpse on Burntrap is him or not. It's possible his body is on a lower level of the pizza place, or that the Mimic wanted to combine with the original Afton. I find it very odd that there is not a hole in the pizza place in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, yet there is one by the time of Security Breach, with Glamrock Freddy explaining that he was the one who made it because Vanny, who is possessed by the Mimic by the way, forced him to dig under the pizza place. Why would she need to get down here unless it's to incorporate Afton onto the Mimic? It's possible that he's still in Ultimate Custom Night and doesn't actually do anything as Burntrap, or potentially it's also possible that he is partially in control of Burntrap and that he essentially merged with the Mimic when the bodies collided. However, you may be quick to point out that the newest epilogue of Tales from the Pizzaplex shows that the Mimic climbed into a suit with Kelly inside and crushed her body. This may imply that Kelly is actually the corpse on Burntrap. After all, a lot of the flesh on Burntrap is strangely wrapped around the endoskeleton, which makes sense considering the Mimic was in a very strange shape when getting into the suit, and after he got in and crushed Kelly, he morphed back into his normal form, which could very well have wrapped flesh around his body. But at the same time, while Kelly very well may be some of the flesh on the body, how exactly would an entire skull and bones straight up replace the Mimic's head and fingers? They can't exactly wrap around the body. Those parts of the body are literally just gone, or at the very least covered, which couldn't exactly be done by just twisting a little bit. It seems more likely that it was physically and intentionally done to the Mimic, likely by Vanny. So even if some of Burntrap has Kelly's corpse, I severely doubt that she's the entirety of the flesh and bones on Burntrap, leaving the door open for Afton to stay peeking through. There's also the question of which suit is being used for Burntrap, but I think the most likely option is that it's the Springtrap suit from Pressure. I could be wrong, but I don't think we'll be seeing the Mimic get springlocked in the epilogues, unless of course the storyline with Lucia ends before the series ends, and the epilogues continue on with a different storyline fast forwarding to the Pizzaplex already being open, but I guess we'll see. Anyway, there's one more idea regarding Afton still being around. what if Afton was inside the blob? Now, I doubt this would be the case, but it's technically possible. As I talked about in yesterday's under construction video, a game version of the Afton amalgamation with Burntrap and the blob combining together would be really cool, but is also actually really likely for the reasons I talked about in that video. But while the Mimic only acting as Afton just being a part of it would be cool, wouldn't it be cooler if Afton himself was in the Afton amalgamation? I think if anything, Afton is a part of Burntrap, but if he wasn't, it's technically possible that he would be inside the blob, possibly alongside his other victims if we're to believe that theory, which most people don't, but I do, and it could be interesting if the blob had attacked Burntrap so that Afton could unite with the Mimic, the replication of Afton combining with Afton himself. Would that be interesting to see? I mean, it may have already happened if Burntrap does have Afton as a part of him, but if he doesn't, this version could be kinda cool. I severely doubt it, but I just wanted to bring it up as a possibility. Now, this is normally where I would end the video, but with Ruin coming out in only 8 days now, I feel like I should just put my thoughts out there about what I think could happen in Ruin. I'll only talk briefly about this, but I just wanted to get my ideas out there. Cassie, Gregory's friend, is going into the Pizzaplex, which had been abandoned for months. Gregory seems to be trapped somewhere underneath the Pizzaplex, so Cassie's goal is to find a way to maneuver through the Pizzaplex and try to get under it. She has to avoid the animatronics, including ruined versions of Freddy, Chica, Monty, and the daycare attendant, but using a device she has, she's able to take control of Roxy so that she wouldn't attack her and may possibly even help her. Eventually, I think that Cassie may very well make her way under the Pizzaplex, where she will find one of two things. One is Gregory actually still trapped under the Pizzaplex, with the Afton amalgamation there as well, and two is just the Afton amalgamation, which was mimicking Gregory's voice all along. I also believe that the FNaF 6 location is a repurposed Fredbear's Family Diner, which I talked about in videos in the past and will be doing a new video on in the very, very near future. But if that's the case, that means the FNaF 4 house and the sister location bunker are also under the Pizzaplex. So while this may be a stretch, it's possible that we end up in them in Ruin. Who knows for sure, but besides all that, I don't know what to expect, which honestly gets me really excited. But what do you guys think? Do you think that William is still around? Are you excited for Ruin? Let me know in the comments, and if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!